Hello and welcome. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most celebrated modern commentaries on the Holy Quran. It's a work by the 20th century scholar Abdurrahman As-Saadi, and it's famous for being incredibly clear and profound. So in this explainer, we're going to break down its core themes. Let's get started. So here's how we're going to tackle this. We'll look at it through 5 key ideas. First, we'll get a handle on what this text actually is. Then we'll explore its vision of God, the amazing stories of the messengers, what it means to live a righteous life, and finally, we'll talk about the concept of the final reckoning. All right, first up, a guide to understanding. Before we can really get into the nitty-gritty, we have to understand what we're even looking at. So what exactly is this commentary? Okay, so the work we're exploring is a tafsir, and that's just the scholarly term for an interpretation of the Quran. Now, Al-Saadi's specific tafsir, which is called Taysir al-Karim al-Rahman, was written with a very clear goal. And what's so cool about it is the focus on accessibility. Al-Saadi literally wanted to write it in simple language to make it understandable for the widest possible audience. Now, to make sure his work was both clear and solid, Al-Saadi based his interpretations on a pretty clear set of sources. The commentary itself explains that he would first look to the Quran to explain the Quran, using other verses to shed light on a passage. If that didn't work, he'd turn to the authentic sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, and then finally, he'd look at what the Prophet's own companions had to say. That brings us to our second and honestly most foundational theme: the commentary's understanding of God's nature. Let's dive into the divine attributes that really shape the entire worldview presented in this text. This one verse just perfectly captures a central idea in the commentary, right? It's all about that relationship between divine power and our own human responsibility. The commentary presents God as perfectly just, which means that any suffering we experience is really a direct result of our own actions. The fault isn't with the Creator, but with the choices that we make. So this commentary really builds its picture of God on several core attributes. You can see them here. He is the wise Creator, who doesn't create anything in vain, without a purpose. He is also the merciful, who doesn't just rush to punish, but instead keeps the gates of repentance wide open. He is the just, who will ultimately give every single soul exactly what it has earned. And finally, he is the all-knowing, whose knowledge, as the commentary says, covers everything, both what we can see and what we can't. So you might be asking, how are these big ideas like mercy and justice made real and understandable? Well, the commentary does it through stories. And that brings us to our third section, which is all about how divine guidance is shown through the incredible lives of the messengers and prophets. As-Saadi calls the Quran itself the most beautiful of stories. And he points out that its power comes from the fact that it's true, from the beauty of its language, and from the incredible depth of its meanings. These aren't just fairy tales. They're presented as real historical events meant to give us moral and spiritual guidance. Just look at the story of the Prophet Yusuf or Joseph. It's a perfect example. His life is like this epic movie about divine planning. It starts with a prophetic dream, which makes his brothers super jealous, and they betray him. He goes through incredible hardship, gets thrown into a well, faces temptation in Egypt, even gets thrown in prison for something he didn't do, but he never loses faith. And then his God-given wisdom raises him up to a position of power where he saves an entire nation from famine. The story ends with this powerful scene where he forgives the very family that tried to destroy him. It's just a masterclass in patience and trusting the plan. And then we have another huge figure, the prophet Musa, or Moses. What's interesting is the commentary doesn't paint the prophets as perfect. This quote here captures a moment where Moses is just human. He had killed an oppressor the day before, and now his temper flares up again and someone calls him out on it. It's this raw, real moment that shows a prophet wrestling with his own past, even as he's trying to do the right thing. And yet this is the same guy who is a perfect model of compassion. He's on the run for his life, and he sees 2 women struggling to water their animals. The commentary points out that he helped them purely for the sake of God without asking for anything in return. And right after, he goes and prays for any good thing God might send his way. That one selfless act, done with zero expectation, ends up being the very thing that saves him. And that's the thing, right? These stories aren't just about ancient prophets. They're about us. They're laying out a clear choice for every single human being. And that brings us perfectly to our 4th section, living a righteous life. The commentary draws this really sharp line in the sand between 2 ways of life. On one side, you have the righteous. They're defined by sincere worship, by helping others, by avoiding pointless gossip, and by being humble. But on the other side, you have the unbelievers. They're described as being blind to all the signs of God in the world. They just follow their own desires, making up their own rules. The text uses this really intense metaphor, comparing them to cattle, but then says they are even further astray. Because, hey, at least animals listen to their shepherd.
And these principles aren't just abstract ideas, they apply to every part of life, including business. The commentary pulls out these rules for fair trade taught by the Prophet Shuaib. Give people the full amount they paid for, weigh things with a fair scale, don't cheat people out of what's theirs, and don't spread corruption. I mean, these are timeless rules for economic justice, and they're seen as a core part of what it means to be a good person.
So every action, every choice, every path we take has to lead somewhere. And that brings us to our fifth and final section, the final reckoning. This is where all those themes of divine justice, mercy, and our own accountability really come together. What's so wild about this description is the sense of shock about time. When the horn is blown and everyone is resurrected, our entire life on earth is going to feel incredibly short. People will whisper to each other that it felt like only 10 days. And the most perceptive ones will say, no, it was only a single day. Just think about that. Your whole life, all the good and the bad, shrinking to almost nothing in the face of eternity. And on that day, that core principle of justice is finally perfectly realized. This verse is basically the thesis statement for the whole day of judgment. Every single soul will get back exactly what it put in. Good for good, evil for evil. There's no unfairness, just a swift and perfect accounting of a life's worth of choices. And so those two paths we talked about, they finally reach their destinations. The commentary explains that all faces will be humbled before God. The people who chose injustice will be in total despair, realizing what they've lost. But the person who was a believer and did righteous things will have absolutely nothing to fear. No injustice in their punishment and no shortchanging on their reward. It is the ultimate finale to a life of conscious choices. So in the end, As-Saadi's commentary lays out this whole system, from understanding God to learning from the prophets to our daily choices, all leading to a final, just outcome. It really leaves us with a big question to chew on. In our own complicated modern lives, how do these ancient stories about faith, accountability, and justice still speak to us today?